Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about our free agency predictions and a little bit of a preview for the defensive players who are going to be available this free agency period coming up next week. We also talked about offensive players. If you haven't had a chance yet, go check that out. Hike! All right, Joe. So starting off with the defensive end edge rusher group, it leads the group with defensive end Danielle Hunter, Chase Young, Jonathan Grenard, Josh Uche, Andrew Van Ginkel, and Jadeveon Clowney. So, Joe, what do you think about this group? What are your thoughts as to where these guys could go?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting group. Edge rusher has become a really sought-after position in the league via free agency and also the draft. I mean, teams have made it a real focal point to go out and get after the quarterbacks. So Danielle Hunter's at the top of the list. He's going to have a vast market. It's tough for me to say where a landing spot is, obviously. Selfishly, I'd like him to go to the Broncos. I don't know if that makes sense, though. A lot of other teams have a lot more money they could throw at him. Commanders have the most money. I don't know if that makes a whole ton of sense. It's going to be a team that's looking to compete. I think it'd be interesting if he were to go to the Lions and be opposite of Aiden Hutchinson there.
Interesting. I'm thinking of a different group when it comes to a pass rusher in that division, and that's the Bears. Bears have a ton of money. The defensive line is in absolute shambles. They traded for Montez Sweat. But if they could have Montez Sweat and Hunter, that team could be a heck of a lot better. And there's not, in my view, a great pass rushing class coming in. I mean, I like Verse. I think Dallas Turner is interesting, but they're not. I don't think they're Danielle Hunter right now. And Eberflus' job is red hot. If he doesn't make the playoffs this year, he's toast. So they're going to – and who knows, even – I don't know. I mean, I would think Poles is safe, but you never know. So to me, they're going to want to make a splash. They're not going to want to mess around. The other team that I think is interesting is the Dallas Cowboys. Mike Zimmer was the former head coach. Now he's the defensive coordinator of the Cowboys. Dallas is always looking for some sort of splash. I know they got Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, but Lawrence is really not getting any younger. I feel his play has kind of fallen off. And how are they going to even use Parsons? I know they designated him as a franchise tag player for defensive end. But, will they have different plans for him than what he's been used in the past?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. A lot of times we say it's about who you know and what your relationships are and connect the dots. I mean, Mike Zimmer being at the Dallas Cowboys, I think Cowboys make a ton of sense there.
I think as far as some of the other guys, I think Jonathan Grenard is going to come back with the Texans.
I hope he does. I think that, what him and Will Anderson were able to do, I like them as a duo there.
I wouldn't be surprised even if he gets re-signed prior to free agency. I mean, they've got $70 million in cap space. What do they intend to use all that cap space for? He has been a homegrown player. Like you said, he plays great with Will Anderson. I would not be surprised if we see that he's re-signed. And even maybe before this episode releases, he could be re-signed.
Yeah. From an IDP standpoint, I would really like that.
Another interesting component here with all this is Andrew Van Ginkel, a guy who had a career year. Dolphins don't have the cap space, but Bradley Chubb is tore his ACL. So who knows when he's going to be ready? Will he be ready by training camp or what have you? You also got Jalen Phillips who's been dealing with injuries. I think that he's the type of player. Tell me I'm nuts, but I see him going to the Minnesota Vikings. That's kind of my. I don't know if there's any attachment there as far as a player. Fangio obviously they got a lot out of him. You could say would he go to the Eagles? But do the Eagles really need him? They have a lot of pass rush. But they weren't able to do it. So those are two names in my mind that could be a possibility.
Yeah, I think those would make sense. Especially Vikings are going to need a replacement for Hunter. You say Eagles disappointed. Their sack numbers went way down. I think that'd be interesting if he does reunite with Fangio. But I don't know. Something tells me, is that Van Ginkel a guy that a team like the could see him. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to see him play in Arizona, and you get him across from playing with Gardeck, and both of these guys just the long flow out of the helmets
Oh boy,
in Arizona, getting after the quarterback. But yeah, I think Van Ginkel's going to be really interesting. I mean, he's a strong special teams player. He makes a ton of plays there. I think he's going to be, not only coveted as an edge rusher, but also what he does on special teams.
I'll quickly talk about this guy because I know you're not going to want to talk about him because he's one of your least favorite players in the NFL. I think Clowney goes back to Baltimore. He's been signing one-year deals all along. I think he did really well there. I think better than what I expected. I think for you as well.
I think wasn't it his agent that said it's rare for him to end the season with like a smile on his face of where he was, and that's what happened when the season ended with Baltimore. Yeah, there was a post about how I don't know if it was a smile or his happiness, and he was actually happy when how the season ended with the Baltimore Ravens. So I think you're right, and I agree with that.
Now, the guys who are probably the most interesting, your former Michigan man, Josh Uche, who has shown some flash, and then Chase Young. Young, I have no idea what to think about that guy. He's a huge name, but by all the metrics in his performance, it was extremely lackluster. So I don't know what to think about where this guy's going to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you even saw it, like, there wasn't much of a trading market for the guy. I mean, 49ers gave up a third-round pick. I just don't know what the perception of him around the league is. Obviously, there's some really bad tape out there for his play in the playoffs and how teams were able to just push him around in the run game. And then, basically watching, Jahmyr Gibbs and Aaron Jones run in the end zone and they're not even putting on much of a fight. So I think there's a lot of questions on Chase Young. And, I think he might have to go to like a weaker team and maybe just on like a 1-year prove-it deal and really try to show out and improve his play.
My prediction is he goes back to the Niners. I think he, maybe wants to feel like he wants to get a Super Bowl. He has that relationship with Nick Bosa. They played in Ohio State. Bosa wants him to come back. Obviously, they trade a lot to acquire Chase Young, unless they're turned off by him. But I think they're going to say, look, go ahead and test your market. We're not going to pay you really anything at all. I think he'll come back for a prove-it deal.
Yeah, I think that is probably the most likely thing because I just don't know if another organization just wants to take him on.
Now, what about Uche, though? He's a real wild card. He's a guy who I think, just based on potential, could get a ton of money, or do you think I'm wrong?
I don't know. I just don't know if the production's there. Like, he's interesting. Like you said, he's also shown flashes. Tough to say. I mean, I think he's got to be in the right system. I think he'd fit with like a Baltimore Ravens style defense, maybe even like Seattle Seahawks with them, that Mike McDonald type of system as well. I think a couple of teams like that, would make sense.
I'm going to give two names out there, I think. Falcons, who are really in desperate need of a pass rusher. I think that could be an interesting play for them. And then Chargers. Now, Chargers don't have a ton of money, but I think they're going to have to move either Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa, or maybe both. So if that's the case, who are they going to play? They got Tuli Tuilopa, or I'm not saying that right, but I think that that's an interesting play as well.
Yeah, it's Tupelotu, right?
Yeah, you said that right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I do think that something like that would make a lot of sense for the Chargers.
So going over a defensive tackle, this is a rich group, Joe. Leading the pack, we've got Chris Jones of the Kansas City Chiefs, Christian Wilkins, who the Dolphins elected not to tag, to my surprise, because he has been one of the better players. Leonard Williams, who the Seahawks traded quite a bit for to acquire back in the previous regime. Grover Stewart, who, unfortunately dealt with some PEDs, I believe, and kind of was suspended for a few games, but has been a good player. Sheldon Rankins, and then DJ Reader. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on this group?
Yeah, like you said, man, I'm really surprised that Christian Wilkins is on this list. He just means so much for that Miami Dolphins defense. And for them not to franchise tag, like you said, I was really surprised. With that being said, I think Chris Jones ultimately goes back to the Chiefs. I think they're going to figure out a way to get that done. I think he wants to go back. I think he wants to be part of the pursuit of the three-peat. And I think despite him being drunk on the podium and saying all those things at the parade, I think deep down he truly wants to be back there. And I think the Chiefs will be motivated to get something done and bring him back. Christian Wilkins, man, he's just so interesting. He's going to have so many teams looking for his services. He's a really dominant player. Do you think, do you think like maybe a team like the Bears are in play for this guy too?
I mean, yeah, I definitely think it's possible. They've got a ton of money. I think Wilkins has primarily done well, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think he's done well more of in a 3-4 type of front. I mean, Dolphins have not been in a 4-3 front that I can remember in a very long time. So,
Right.
I mean, so to me, I'd be kind of curious as to what teams have a lot of money and play in more of a 3-4 style that could fit his play. And off the top of my head, I'm kind of perusing. I'm thinking no name really sticks out. I think he's just going to go for the highest bidder. I really do. That to me is kind of the logic. But it doesn't make sense for the Commanders. They've got Deron Payne. They've got Jonathan Allen. Patriots have got Barmore. Maybe they get a second guy, but I kind of doubt it. Titans have Jeffrey Simmons. Maybe they get a second guy. I kind of doubt it. Maybe it depends on splashes, but I don't know. Maybe I don't believe that Jonathan Gannon runs a 3-4, but I think the Cardinals could be interesting.
Yeah. What about the Texans?
I thought about them as well. I was thinking maybe Cardinals or Texans.
Texans got $70 million cap space. We saw Sheldon Rankins is on this list. He performed pretty well for them. I don't know if they'll decide to bring him back or not. Maybe it depends on what other splash moves they make at other positions. And I feel like they could bring him back on the cheap. But if they want to make a big splash at defensive tackle, I think Wilkins could be a monster in that defense.
You might think I'm crazy here, but I actually think that Chris Jones will not go back to the Chiefs.
Oh, interesting. I like this.
Well, I think here's the thing. Well, I would like it too, but here's the thing. He has won multiple Super Bowls with them, and he has been dealing with them as far as like a financial perspective for quite some time, and the Chiefs don't have the money to deal with it unless he'll wait on them and they trade Snead. They can't keep Snead on the tag and sign him, I don't believe. So I actually think he may go for the highest bidder. I think somebody will throw him, something crazy. I wouldn't be shocked if he got over $100 million offer by some team, and then he takes it. So what team throws him that money? Maybe a team like the Lions. They are desperately wanting some pass rush help. They are really in the thick of it right now. That could be a very interesting push by them.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I think Dan Campbell would absolutely love a guy like Chris Jones. Honestly, the Lions could be in play for Christian Wilkins too. You mentioned that. They got Aleem McNeil in the middle, but I don't know what else. And I think either one of those guys could make a lot of sense for that defense.
Are any of these other guys interesting to you? I think Reeder and Rankins are just okay. I think they're filling guys. But I think in Stewart, I don't know what to think about him because of the PEDs. The only other name that's kind of interesting is Leonard Williams.
Yeah, I agree. Leonard Williams is interesting. He's kind of just been up and down in terms of what he was. I feel like maybe a return to the Seahawks makes sense because I felt like he was playing better with Seattle than he was with the Giants, and they got familiar with him, and maybe they just want to retain him. But I think I'd also be curious. I don't know what makes sense for a guy like Grover Stewart, but I do think he's really good at stopping the run. And I know he was on the PED, he's been suspended, but he's been a productive defensive tackle, so I'm curious to see where he might land as well.
So let's go over to the linebacker group, Joe. We've got Patrick Queen, Devin White, Jordan Brooks, Frankie Lulu, Azeez Al-Shaair, and then the legend Bobby Wagner. So, what do you think about this group?
Yeah, there's some really interesting names on this list here. Patrick Queen, he could get a lot of money, or maybe he doesn't. I mean, he really had a good year last year, but up until then, I think most people would consider him a disappointment in terms of his play with the Ravens. Then you have Devin White. I don't really know how teams are going to perceive this guy. Obviously, some troubles have come out, with the Buccaneers that he had. So I definitely, White's not going back to the Bucs. I'll try to think of a team that I would protect him to go to. Jordan Brooks is a interesting younger player along with Frankie Louvu. Though, as you mentioned, the legend Bobby Wagner, he just needs to go and stay with the Seahawks and finish it out and retire a Seattle Seahawk and, stop playing these games and just stick with the Seahawks.
Yeah, I think for me, Patrick Queen makes a lot of sense for the Seahawks. I think that with Mike McDonald, you saw him be able to get the most out of Queen, I think, this past season. And I think with Jordan Brooks and Wagner both being out, maybe Wagner comes back, maybe he doesn't, but it's a huge void for them. I think Queen makes a ton of sense for the Seahawks. As far as some of these other guys, I agree with you. I think Wagner should go to the Seahawks. If he doesn't, I don't really know where he goes. Obviously, he signed with the Rams for that weird contract. I don't know where he goes. That's a tough one for me. I think Lulu will go back to the Panthers. I think that he did well with Evero as a defensive coordinator. I don't see why he would go elsewhere. That's just my opinion on that. As far as Devin White goes, he's probably one of the more interesting names in this list.
Yeah.
I don't know where he goes. My guess is, and I won't like it, but I'm going to go with the Eagles. They tend, I feel, to blitz their linebackers quite a bit. And I don't know if he'll cost all that much. So to me, I think him going to the Eagles could make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Eagles are in play for Patrick Queen or Devin White. I think that, linebacker position is they desperately need people. They drafted Nakobe Dean. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy, and we haven't really seen him on the field that much. So I do think, they're typically pretty aggressive. They can be in free agency, so I wouldn't be shocked if either one of those guys landed.
But they typically don't spend at the linebacker position. But White's a different type of linebacker. He's sent on blitz a lot. He is an inline.
So was Queen.
Right, either one. I agree.
Yeah.
I could see either one for sure. Al-Shaair is an interesting one. I don't know what to think about him. Some PFF grades view him as not as favorably. I don't think he goes back to Tennessee. Maybe he goes back to Tennessee. I mean, Rand Carthan was the reason why they brought him there. That was the reasoning. Because Rand Carthan came from San Francisco.
Right.
Working in their sky department. So I could see him going back there. And maybe he makes a reunion back with San Francisco. I mean, Dre Greenlaw did tear his Achilles. So, I mean, there's a possibility maybe he goes back there. But I don't expect Al-Shaair to get a ton of money.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, I think he's looking at another, 1-year deal, and we just really haven't seen teams, as you mentioned with the Eagles, like spend up and at the linebacker position. So I agree with you. I think the Titans and 49ers make a lot of sense for him.
What do you make of Jordan Brooks? Guy, again, from PFF standpoint, doesn't look all that good.
Yeah, I think it depends on how much people and teams read into the PFF or just focus on the tape of the guy. I could see the Seahawks possibly bringing this guy back. He's been productive. Maybe if they, try to bring in a guy like Patrick Queen or Devin White and they strike out, maybe they just bring Jordan Brooks back.
Yeah, I could also see. I mean, I keep on saying this as a team, but I feel like the Raiders could be a possibility as well.
Yeah, I definitely could see that.
I mean, they don't really. I mean, they did what they did with Bobby Spillane as their linebacker with Davine Diablo as well, but they don't really have like a I feel like a bona fide linebacker, and that's what Pierce played. So I would think that he would want to get somebody that would match his style. So not that Brooks is exactly like Pierce, but because I mean,
Yeah,
I can't really say, but
I don't think Brooks would fit his style. I honestly think Bobby Spillane is the perfect guy for
you really think
Antonio
so?
Pierce. Yeah, because I remember Pierce being like an imposing physical player at the linebacker position, and I don't see that as Jordan Brooks. And that I think Bobby Spillane really embodies that.
One other name that I'll mention that we don't have on the list, Shaq Leonard. You think he's done, or do you think he finds a home again?
I think he could be done. Um, I think the Eagles brought him in. He wasn't impressive there. Much like kind of what we saw with Miles Jack, I think he just could end up being done, even though he was a productive player with the Colts. And he's a guy that's been declining with his ability to cover. And this day and age, you have to not only be able to stop the run, but be out there in coverage, especially if you want to be a 3-down linebacker. I think he's either done or somebody brings him in as part-time role.
Okay, let's go over to the cornerbacks, Joe. Not a very exciting group. When I saw this, it's like, well, I guess it's not that much of a surprise that you see 4 or 5 corners drafted every year in the first round.
Right.
But you've got Kendall Fuller, Chidobe Awuzie, Adoree Jackson, Kenny Moore, Tre'Davious White, who was recently cut by the Buffalo Bills, and Darius Williams, who was cut by the Jaguars, who had a really good season. Any of these guys excite you? Do you think any of them could become a starter again next season?
I tell you what, one guy that stands out to me is Darius Williams. He's a guy that I felt like played well with the Rams. He goes over the Jacksonville Jaguars, has a fair amount of interceptions, productive player there. I was kind of surprised. I get the cap situation, but I was kind of surprised they moved on for him just because I felt like he performed pretty well there. But I do think out of the group, he stands out to me. Kenny Moore, I think, is also interesting. I think personally, as far as, especially from an IDP standpoint, I like it if he were to stick with the Colts. But I think he's an interesting slot corner for somebody. And then Chidobe Awuzie, I know he got hurt a couple of years ago, but I mean, I still think he's a pretty good cover corner.
Yeah, I could definitely see, for whatever reason, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I could see Darius Williams going to Cincinnati. Really needs a lot of cornerback help there. Eli Apple they used pretty heavily. I mean, they only really have Cameron Taylor-Britt. If they don't bring back a Awuzie, they're going to need to bring somebody else in.
Yeah, I think that is potential. I would like that fit.
I think Awuzie or Adoree Jackson, either one of them. I don't really know which, but I think either one of them I could see as a fit for the Commanders. They need a corner desperately if they're not going to bring Kendall Fuller back. Their secondary is in pretty rough shape. So I could see really either one possibly being in play for them.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, they definitely. I mean, Manuel Forbes hasn't been what they expected. And like you said, if they're not bringing Kendall Fuller, even if they do bring Kendall Fuller back, they need some help still.
Another name I like for Kenny Moore, possibly, I could see him going to Chicago. Matt Eberflus was the defensive coordinator for the Colts.
Is that if they don't bring back Jalen Johnson?
Well, Jalen Johnson's on the outside.
They got Kyler Gordon, though, in the slot, and he's been really good.
You really think so? I don't know if he's been that great.
PFF grades out high. Yeah.
Interesting.
Supposedly they like Kyler Gordon as well.
Well, let's see. I know that Kenny Moore was regarded as one of the best nickels out there. So I just think that could. I hear what you're saying. I think it could still be in play.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I'm not so sure that the Bears are in play there, but I think how about as far as he goes, Kenny Moore? How about the Eagles? They're getting rid of Avonte Maddox.
That's a good.
Their secondary is kind of in shambles. I think he'd potentially be a good fit for the Eagles there.
How about Tre'Davious White? Is his career over? I mean, he said he's dealt with some pretty bad injuries of late. Do you think there's even a chance? I could see if he has no market, maybe he comes back to the Bills on a small 1-year deal. But I don't really know what his market will be.
Yeah. I could see. Yeah, I mean, if his market isn't what he expects, I could see him going back to the Bills. But also I feel like it'd be a cowboy move for them to bring in a guy like Trey White, much like what they did with Stephon Gilmore this past year.
Yeah.
Just taking a flyer on the veteran corner, and if he's able to stay healthy, he could be productive for you.
All right, lastly, we got the safety group. Joe, Xavier McKinney for the Giants did not receive the tag. You got Cameron Curl, Rayshon Jenkins, Jeremy Chin, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and Jamal Adams was recently caught by the Seahawks. What do you think of this group, Joe?
Yeah, there's some interesting names. I mean, right at the top, man, Xavier McKinney. I really feel like the Giants need to figure out how to keep that guy as far as their defense goes. I mean, he really had a good year last year. And I feel like, he's just kind of an underrated player that nobody really talks about. And I feel like he's a productive safety in this league and think he could definitely have a market. Cameron Curl, I mean, he's a guy that's been productive with the Commanders. I think the Commanders should figure out a way to keep him on the field. Rayshon Jenkins is interesting to me, but I think, Jamal Adams, I think, should just flat out retire. I think his career is pretty much done. He just can't stay on the field. He keeps getting hurt. Just, everyone had a lot higher thoughts about him, and now these injuries just keep, ruining his reputation. I feel like he should just retire. But the most interesting guy is Jeremy Chin, guy that was, sought after coming out as a rookie. He's shown some production with the Carolina Panthers, but ultimately a little bit disappointing. Curious to see where you think he might land.
I think he's going to the Bills.
Oh, that'd be very interesting. I mean, Sean McDermott, that going back to the Panthers pool.
Well, yeah, and I think just I don't know if he was there that overlap, but I think
I don't know if it overlapped either. But
it's Bills seem to go after Carolina Panthers players all the time. But regardless, but I think you saw Micah Hyde as a free agent; he's not going to come back. You saw they released Jordan Poyer.
Yeah,
and that was hard to see as a Bills fan. I mean, those guys have been with the Bills for the past 7 years. Have really helped reshape this team. But if you remember, even 7 years ago when they first signed him, Poyer was an absolute nobody. Nobody knew who he was. And Hyde was good, but he wasn't great in Green Bay. So I think that if they're able to do this again, maybe they're able to possibly strike a deal with a guy like Chin, for a lower type deal, and they can, Lightning can strike again. So I think Chin makes a lot of sense. They need a safety. I think he's going to want starting playing time so that he can eventually get a big contract. It's going to be a prove-it deal. I don't see anyone giving him a monster deal. That's what I think for Chin. For McKinney, I see the Colts as a possible play. They, their secondary is pretty brutal. I know they have Julian Blackmon comes to mind as a safety for them. I know they've drafted some other safeties that just really haven't ever panned out, like Nick Cross and stuff like that. I think they might want some additional help on that back end. I think McKinney could be a possible play for them. Curl, I think they're going to – we'll find out if they resign him. I think that the Commanders are going to move off of him. I don't think they're going to bring him back. So I don't know if he's going to fit what Dan Quinn wants to do. So then, where does Curl go? Your guess is as good as mine.
But I do agree with your sentiment, though, with Jeremy Chin. I think Jeremy Chin to the Bills could make a lot of sense, and he's one of the younger guys on the list here. And they need to get younger on the back end. I think that's why you see a lot of them moving on from these veteran players, and they're older, even though they were kind of leaders on the team. Just couldn't be relied on with health.
What about C.J. Gardner-Johnson to your Denver Broncos show? Guy who was originally drafted back with the New Orleans Saints. Is there a possibility that Sean Payton brings back, it's basically the Saints of the West here?
Yeah, I think they could make a lot of sense. The Broncos need secondary help. And the interesting thing is C.J. Gardner-Johnson is kind of that tweener player. And the Broncos at the Combine have been talking heavily with these nickel guys coming out of college as well. So Gardner-Johnson, like you said, it is the Broncos, Saints, and Denver at the moment, bringing in everybody over from that organization, and the ties with Sean Payton, that could make a lot of sense. And I could see him wanting to be reunited with Sean Payton.
Yeah, and then as far as Rayshon Jenkins goes, again, if we look into this and we kind of peel back the onion, it's always interesting to find out. It's about who you know. So it'll be interesting. I know he started with the Chargers organization. Now, went to the Jaguars, got released. I think maybe the Jets could be an interesting play. I think that, I don't know if there's any connections there, but Jordan Whitehead is a free agent as well. If he doesn't go back there, they may need a replacement. I could see Jenkins going there.
Yeah, I think Jenkins to the Jets makes a lot of sense. And, I think keep mentioning this team too, but, is that also – did the Eagles bring in a guy like him too for that secondary? They're they basically have Reed Blankenship and was the guy they drafted out of Illinois last year.
Sidney Brown.
Sidney Brown, yeah. Basically, all they have right now is Reed Blankenship and Sidney Brown at safety. So Jenkins to the Eagles could be interesting as well.
So that does it for our free agency predictions. Talked about some landing spots, gave you a little bit of a preview of what players are going to be available. And mind you, there could be some more added by the time this episode drops. Khalil Mack could be joining the group. Some various other players who are being talked about as cap casualties.
Joey Bosa,
that's right. But all I know, and I'm sure you'll say the same, Joe, is it's going to be fun. We got our popcorn ready.
Absolutely.
We are excited to see how this is all going to shake out next week. If you haven't got a chance yet, like I said at the top of the episode, go ahead and check out our offensive free agency predictions as well. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.